Moriah is the name given to a mountain range by the Book of Genesis, in which context it is the location of the sacrifice of Isaac. Traditionally, Moriah has been interpreted as the name of the specific mountain at which this occurred, rather than just the name of the range. Aramaic English Standard Version Torah Gen_2214 Abraham called the name of that place Moriah will provide. As it is said to this day, on Moriah's mountain, it will be provided. Moriah is the Aramaic equivalent of the Hebrew YHWH. Moriah is literally Master YHWH, and is referenced 239 times in the Aramaic New Testament quotations of Old Testament scriptures. It is never used in reference to anyone but YHWH. The majority view in Judaism and Christianity is that Mount Moriah is identical with the Temple Mount of Jerusalem, while modern scholars agree with the Samaritans' view that the sacrifice took place on Mount Gerizim near Shechem. This view, though, is considered highly controversial among religious scholars as well as secular Bible scholars. Muslims have known the historical mount as Marwa in Arabic, as mentioned in the Quran, located close to the Kaaba in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. There has been a historical account of ram's horns preserved in the Kaaba until the year 683, which are believed to be the remains of the sacrifice of Ishmael. Speculation and debate. Religious views. In the Book of Chronicles it is reported that the location of Araunah's threshing floor is in Mount Moriah, and that the Temple of Solomon was built over Araunah's threshing floor. This has led to the classical rabbinical supposition that this is at the peak of Moriah. There is debate as to whether the two references are correctly translated as the same word. For example, in the LXX, these verses are translated as Genesis chapter 22 verse 2. And he said, Take thy son, the beloved one, whom thou hast loved, Isaac, and go into the high land, and offer him there for a whole burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. 2 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 1. And Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem in the Mount of Moriah, where the Lord appeared to his father David, in the place which David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Some interpretations of a biblical passage concerning Melchizedek would indicate Jerusalem was already a city with a priest at the time of Abraham, and thus is unlikely to have been founded after this, at the site of a sacrifice made by Abraham in the wilderness. However, the view that Salem refers to Jerusalem and not pieces of heavy debate between many sects of Jews and Christians. In consequence of these traditions, classical rabbinical literature theorized that the name was a reference to the temple, suggesting translations like the teaching place, the place of fear, the place of myrrh. Targum Pseudo-Jonathan interprets the name as land of worship, while the Samaritan Targum regards it as being land of vision. Scholarly views. Most modern biblical scholars, however, regard the name as a reference to the Amorites. The initial of Iraphasize, the name is thus interpreted as meaning land of the Amorites. This agrees with the Septuagint, where, for example, 2 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 1 refers to the location as Mu Omega Rho Iota Alpha Moriah. This would give it the same etymological root as Hamor, a person's name in the narrative at Genesis chapter 34 which concerns Shechem. Some scholars also identify it with Mori, the location near Shechem at which Abraham built an altar, according to Genesis chapter 12 verse 6. Hence a number of scholars believe that Moriah refers to a hill near Shechem, supporting the Samaritan belief that the near sacrifice of Isaac occurred on Mount Gerizim, a location near Shechem. However, this view disagrees with the Syriac Peshitta and mainly with the Aramaic Torah, where the near sacrifice occurs at the land of Moriah literally. Master YHWH. Correlation Isaac-Jesus. Some scholars reference the conversation Jesus had with the Samaritan woman at the well, where he stated that the Samaritans were inaccurate in their knowledge of the worship of God, acknowledging the intended similarity between the sacrifice of Isaac and the crucifixion of Jesus. They make the connection that Moriah would be the same location where Jews made sacrifices at the Temple of Solomon, Isaac carrying the wood for the sacrificial fire as Jesus carried the cross. The reference in Hebrews chapter 11 verses 17 to 19 to Abraham believing God could raise Isaac from the dead, Isaac being Abraham's only son and Jesus being God's only begotten son, all make the correlation between the two events point to Moriah being the temple site. Muslim views. From a Muslim point of view, the well-known site of Mount Marwa, the hill just outside the perimeter of the Kaaba in Mecca, may be identified with the biblical Moriah from Genesis chapter 22 verse 2. It is irrelevant from a Muslim point of view that the Hebrew Bible identifies the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as Mount Moriah, as early in the biblical narrative as the chapter dedicated to the construction of the first temple in the book of 2 Chronicles, around 1,700 years predating Islam's account. The sacrifice story in Islam. The Islamic version differs from the Bible. In Islamic sources, when Abraham tells his son about the vision, his son accepts to be sacrificed for fulfillment of God's command and no binding to the altar occurred. The Quran states that when Abraham asked for a righteous son, God granted him one possessing forbearance. This son is not, however, named directly in the Quran. When he was able to walk and work, Abraham saw a vision about sacrificing him. When he told his son about it, he accepted to fulfill the command of God in the vision. When they both had submitted their will to God and were ready for the sacrifice, God told Abraham he had fulfilled the vision, provided him with a ram to sacrifice instead, and he also promised to reward Abraham. The next two verses state that God also granted Abraham the righteous son Isaac and promised more rewards. Muslim scholars have endorsed the belief that it was the firstborn son Ishmael, not Isaac, who was asked to be sacrificed in the vision, and that as the second one, Isaac, was born later as one of the rewards for Abraham's fulfillment of his vision. Among early Muslim scholars, however, there was a dispute over the identity of the son. The argument of those early scholars who believed it was Isaac rather than Ishmael was that God's perfecting his mercy on Abraham and Isaac referred to his making Abraham and his friend and saving him from the burning bush, and to his rescuing Isaac. On the contrary, the other parties held that the promise to Sarah was of a son, Isaac, and a grandson, Jacob, excluded the possibility of a premature death of Isaac. Muslims consider that visions experienced by prophets are revelations from God, and as such it was a divine order to Abraham. The entire episode of the sacrifice is regarded as a trial of God for Abraham and his son, and both are seen as having passed the test by submitting to God and showing their awareness that God is the owner and giver of all that we have and cherish, including life and offspring. The submission of Abraham and his son is celebrated and commemorated by Muslims on the days of Eid al-Adha. During the festival, those who can afford and the ones in the pilgrimage sacrifice a ram, cow, sheep or a camel. Part of the sacrifice meat is eaten by the household and remaining is distributed to the neighbors and the needy. The festival marks the end of the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca.